You pulled me from the ashes, you have broken every curse. Blessed Redeemer, you have set this captive free. Lord, I can't help but sing. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. Who am I that the highest King would welcome me? I was lost, but he brought me in. Oh, his love for me. Oh, his love for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. Free at last he has ransomed me. His grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am.
Welcome, everyone. We continue our series of Bible stories you've never heard in VBS. Turn with me tonight to the book, The Song of Solomon. Song of Solomon. So each week we have a craft, VBS craft, or some kind of object to kind of symbolize the lesson that we're doing tonight. Today I have a very well-known looking songbook. The Song of Solomon is called a song. The book is a song, and it has a description here. It's called, look at verse 1 of chapter 1, it's called The Song of Songs, which is Solomon. Now, your Bible may have the heading Song of Songs, or more likely the more traditional one is this book is called The Song of Solomon, but both of them are right and would be fitting. The Song of Songs is a interesting title. That is when you have two words together in the Hebrew language, separated by of, it's a Hebrew superlative. It's like saying something's the tallest, something is the prettiest. So the Song of Songs would be like the songiest. That doesn't sound right. It is, of all the songs, this is the greatest song of all songs. Think King of Kings, the greatest king of all the kings. He's the King of all kings, the Lord of lords, the greatest Lord of all the lords, or the Holy of Holies, the most holy of all the holy things. So this is the Song of Song, which is Solomon's, and it is a great song. Keep your place here at Solomon, because we're going to be here all evening, but turn back with me to 1 Kings chapter 4. Because there's a statement here about Solomon, and particularly these songs. 1 Kings chapter 4. We're going to start back in verse 29 and read 4 verses here. Verse 29 says, Now God gave Solomon wisdom and very great discernment and breadth of mind like the sand that is on the seashore. Now remember that verse. Wisdom, great discernment, breadth of mind. We're going to come back to that verse at the end. Verse 30, Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the sons of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, Heman, Calcol, Darda, the sons of Mahal, and his fame was known in all the surrounding nations. Verse 32, he also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. So he wrote, back to Solomon, he wrote 1,005 songs, the Bible tells us, but this one was the song of all songs. Now, we don't know what the other songs were. We know Solomon wrote Proverbs, likely wrote Ecclesiastes, and a couple of Psalms have been attributed him, but this song is the song of all songs. Since we don't know all the other songs, could we say Solomon was a one-hit wonder? All right. Song of Songs, the Song of Solomon. So why was this book written? Why is it in the Bible, and what is it about? You may know quite a bit about this book. The language might be called, or the topic could called steamy. It could be explicit, sultry. There's a lot of things in the Song of Solomon that would make people blush. And so we would say, why was this book written? Why is it in the Bible? What is it saying? Well, there's been several views about what this book is and why it's here and what it means. There's an old Jewish tradition that a few people still hold to. Ancient rabbis believed this was an allegory of God's love, and it was about the nation of Israel. So the man and the woman here would be this allegory. Allegories like it says something, but it doesn't mean what you think it means. It actually means something else. And so that would be, this book is not saying what it's not saying what you're reading. It actually means something else. It's an allegory and about God's love and the nation of Israel. Well, so there's a little bit of credence we could give to that. I mean, you think about the book of Hosea. God told Hosea to go marry a prostitute, and he talks about their relationship. And then God begins to say, you're an adulterous people. You have left your first love. And so he uses the story of Hosea and Gomer, the prostitute. He uses that story to kind of talk about the relationship, but particularly to highlight Israel's rebellion, their tendency to go and follow other idols. But it's made pretty clear in the book, that connection. I mean, you read that, and God makes that connection between Hosea and his wife, who was a former prostitute and then went back to prostitution. He made that clear, the symbolic meaning between he and the relationship. So that's one thought, is that it's about God and his relationship with Israel, the nation of Israel. A second thing came about after Jesus in the Christian world, and people see this as a type of Christ's love for the church. Now, we do have several there are types in the Bible. The sacrificial lamb was a type of Christ. So there are many things there are a type. And then we have Ephesians 5, where Paul compares Christ's love for the church, that a husband should love his wife like Christ loved the church. And there's some talk about leadership and submission, and how the church is to be submissive and to Christ's leadership, and it talks about that husband relationship. So we see some connection there between Christ and his love for the church, and a husband and a love for his wife. And Paul tells us that comparison. But Solomon didn't know what the church was, and he didn't know the Messiah at the time of this writing. And so there's some challenges there. So what is this book then? So this book seems to be a love song, as it's called a song. It's a love song, or it's poetry about the love between a man and a woman. So we titled tonight's lesson, When a Man Loves a Woman. It's also a story about, it's about love, but it's also the story about sexual intimacy and marital intimacy. So this idea of this being what it says, it's a story about two people being in love, is the most common thought about why this book was written, and or what the purpose is. And we'll talk more about that at the end. But we're going to go with that, and we're going to look at some things in the Song of Solomon, and we're going to kind of see a little bit about what this book is saying, and we're going to kind of pick up some pieces through the book. We can't read the whole book, but we're going to pick up some pieces of it. All right. So this song that Solomon wrote is principally between two people. Now, it doesn't mention who either one of these are, this man and this woman, but most think that it is about Solomon. So there's some sections here that we're going to talk about, but one of the sections is about a wedding. And if you look over at chapter 3 and verse 11, let's look at that. There's Solomon's name is mentioned here several times, but one time it's the curtains of Solomon, the chair of Solomon. It never really says that this person is Solomon, except for maybe verse 11 of chapter 3. It says, "Go forth, O daughters of Zion, and gaze on King Solomon with the crown with which his mother has crowned him on the day of his wedding and on the day of his gladness of heart." Now, we're going to go through this in a little bit, and you're going to see the progression. This is a wedding. A wedding is taking place here in chapter 3, and it says on the day of his wedding. So likely the man who's in love in this story is Solomon. Now, the girl, she's never named. The woman in here, who the relationship between her and the man is never mentioned. But if you go over to chapter 6, verse 13, we find some things about her. All right, chapter 6, verse 13. Come back, O Shulamite. Come back, that we may gaze at you. Why should you gaze at the Shulamite, as at the dance of the two companies?" So they're talking about this man and this woman, and now they focused on the woman, and they call her a Shulamite. A Shulamite was someone from the town of Shunem, which was a town in Israel. And so we see then it's a song about Solomon and his love for the Shulamite girl and the Shulamite girl's love for Solomon. Now, there's one big problem about this being Solomon, because when we read the Song of Solomon, this guy loves this girl. I mean, he is infatuated with her. He is in deep love with her. And several times he mentions she is the only one. So many believe this is Solomon's first wife before he married 699 other gals. So you see the problem here. It seems to be Solomon, but we think that this probably was his first wife before he married other wives and started making a mess of his life. So the Song of Solomon, as we look at the whole book, we're going to see three parts of the book. The first part is the engagement or the courtship. There's a relationship between this man and this woman, and it seems to be a courtship, an engagement. And that starts in verse 2 of chapter 1 and goes through chapter 3 of verse 5. The second part is the wedding and the honeymoon. So we have the courtship, then we have a wedding and an obvious honeymoon here. That's found in chapter 3, verse 6 through chapter 5 and verse 1. And then in chapter 5 of verse 2 through the end of the book, we get into the marriage. We see then that they're living life together. Interestingly enough, we see that they have conflict, and then that they work it out, and then they commit again to one another. So courtship, a wedding, and then the marriage. So it's interesting. I saw that one person made, as this book is broken down that way, made the connection with Genesis chapter 2 and verse 24. Right after God took a rib from Adam and created Eve, this was said, "For this reason a man shall leave his mother and father and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." And this author was pointing out the connection between that verse and Song of Solomon and its breakdown, Because he says in Genesis 2:24, there's a leaving. A man shall leave his mother and father and be joined to his wife. So there's a leaving, then there's a cleaving, and they shall become one flesh. And so then there's a weaving. Leaving, cleaving, and weaving. But then in book we have courtship, wedding, and marriage. I think that's a great correlation and connection between the two. So it's a man's love for his wife. All right, we're going to look at some parts and look a little bit about the courtship. It's interesting as we think about the courtship then and what courtship is today. We talk about dating. And if I could be cynical here, knowing this is not the case for everything, but seems like dating is that process that involves hiding all the things you don't want the other person to know, putting your best foot forward, kind of conning the other person into liking you, only to reveal who you really are after the I do's. Now, as I said, that's kind of a cynical, but that's kind of what dating is. In biblical times, the courtship was one where it was done in a public setting, so there was a lot of accountability. And when things began to get serious, when there was kind of that courtship begun, it was often guided usually by parents. And particularly in here, we can see the Shulamite woman, the girl in this love story, was very close to her mother. And so the courtships that was back then is different than what we have today. Okay, let's start. We're going to read some verses and talk about this. We're going to see in verse 2 through 4 that the Shulamite girl is kind of talking to herself, but right away we're going to see how attractive she is. Verse 2 of chapter 1, may he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Your oils have a pleasing fragrance. Your name is like purified oil. Therefore the maidens love you. Draw me after you, and let us run together. The king has brought me into his chambers. So she's using language here that says she's very attractive to this man. It's very attractive to him. But she says, draw me after you. Let me come together. There are several times we see in here, it's like she wants to have dignity. She has respect for herself. She doesn't want to be too obvious or too forward. So she's basically saying, I find you very attractive, but I want you to make the first move. Don't make me have to be too forward in doing this. So we see here, and we'll see throughout this book and in the courtship part of it, that she has a lot of grace towards this relationship. She's very gracious. She's very slow. She doesn't want to be too forward or too obvious. Now in verse 5, we're going to start finding some things about her, and it's going to explain. It starts out in verse 5. She says, I am black but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not stare at me, because I am swarthy, for the sun has burned me. My mother's sons were angry with me, and they made me caretaker of the vineyard. But I have not taken care of my own vineyard. So she begins to say, I'm dark-skinned, and because I've been made to work out in the vineyards, I've had to work out. She's kind of basically saying, I'm a peasant. We don't have a lot of means in our family, and the daughters have to work. And my job was to go out into the vineyard. Look at my skin. It's tanned. It's interesting because today we think that's something to be sought after, right? to be tanned. But back then, that was a sign that you had to be outside working, doing hard tasks, and particularly for a woman, if they did that, that meant she was kind of a family without much means, and everybody had to pitch in to do everything just to get by. Even the women had to toil out in the fields. So she's saying that, and she's very self-conscious. Now, today we talk a lot about how self-conscious we are, right? She was very self-conscious of her appearance. We think that might be a new thing, but we see that here. Today, we're very self-conscious, right? We've got big mirrors in the bathroom and mirrors in every room. Mirrors as we walk out the door, we can check ourselves. So we're very conscious of this. All right. So we continue to go on as we look at this. Verse 7 says, "Tell me, O you whom my soul loves, where do you pasture your flock? Where do you make it lie down at noon? For why should I be like one who veils herself beside the flocks of your companion?" Once again, she's saying, where do you go? I mean, where are you? Should I be the one that comes out after you? Should I put my veil on and come out to meet you? And once again, she's saying, I'm very attracted to you. I want to spend more time with you, but please, you be the one to do it. I don't want to overstep my bounds. I don't want to look like the silly schoolgirl in love. And so she, again, is having boundaries and has a lot of respect for herself. All right. Now, Solomon, or the man in the story, is going to respond. You remember she said, do not stare at me. And so, verse 8, Solomon says, "If you yourself do not know, most beautiful among women, go forth on the trail of the flock and pasture your young goats by the tents of the shepherds. To me, my darling, you are like my mare among the chariots of Pharaoh." So part of this, Solomon is saying, you are beautiful, and I have noticed you. And I think he's making a commitment to say, I'm coming around. I will make the first move. And so he gives this description to her. He says, "My darling, you are my mare among the chariots of Pharaoh." Now, is that a compliment or is that an insult? You're like my horse that pulls the chariots. So there's quite a few funny visual imagery that are meant to be compliments in the Song of Solomon. And obviously, these are not meant to be visual imagery. Song of Solomon, when you read about him, you will find that he loves his horses. He loves horses. And what he's saying is, you're like, if I had horses, there's one that stands all alone. You would be the one that stands out among all the horses if you were a horse. So that's what he's saying. It's a little bit different, some of the compliments. Now, I'm going to pause here and just share some things. I don't know what your pickup lines were. There's quite a few pickup lines and compliments here. These may be some pickup lines that if you're single, you may want to use, or maybe you can pass this on. But here are some of the pickup lines from the Song of Solomon. "Your hair is like a flock of goats descending from the hills of Gilead." Another one. "Your teeth are like a flock of sheep just shorn, coming up from the washing. Your temples are like the halves of a pomegranate. Your neck is like the Tower of David." Does that mean long? Oh, there's a second part. "Your neck is like the Tower of David. On it hangs 1,000 shields." The scent of your garments is like the scent of Lebanon. Your belly is like a heap of wheat. Your nose is like the tower of Lebanon. That sounds like an insult. Your navel is like a round goblet. A round goblet. All right. So we've got some of these nice compliments. And again, if you were to try to draw a picture of all that, you would have quite a scary looking character, I think. But these things had meaning. It was different than visual imagery that we often use to compliment someone. So this book goes on. The chapter goes on, and they talk back and forth, and they're talking about I'm attracted to you. You're beautiful. How handsome you are. And so these things go back and forth. All right, let's go over to chapter 2 and verse 4. We see this courtship blooming, and then we see it moving a little further. She says, he has brought me to his banquet hall, and his banner over me is love. So we begin to see in this relationship, it's now become public. You know, now he's courting her out in public. He brought him to his banquet hall. So now, verse 7 again is an interesting part in this love. It says, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the hinds of the field, that you do not arouse or waken my love until she pleases. Now, he's not saying don't wake up grouchy, okay? Don't wake her up. She needs her sleep. That's not what he's saying. He's talking about love, and he says, don't do it. Don't arouse this prematurely. He's saying love has its place and love has its time, but we don't want to stimulate that prematurely. We don't want to rush love. Let's let love grow. Let's let its roots grow deep. Attraction is important and all these things, but character, attraction that comes from good character is what grows deep roots in the relationship. With Dina and I, we later talked about our, over the years we talked about what attracted us to each other, and we often think about the physical parts, and there was that, but for me, the way I saw that her relationship with God was important to her, that church was important to her, the respect that she had for her parents, the way that she was not affected by peer pressure. She was going to be who she wanted to be. She didn't care what others thought. I mean, those were the things that made me fall in love with her. And then she would tell things like she liked the way I treated my mom. She watched me with my little nephews. She liked that. She liked the same thing. She liked my dedication and commitment to being a follower of Christ. These were the things that you don't find out with people if you rush that relationship. And so there's this desire, there's this longing for us to be intimate and to be loved. God certainly gave us hormones. The sexual impulse is God-given, but it also must be God-guided. Too many times today, relationships are rushed. Sex is a gift from God, but I've heard someone compare it to like fire. Like in the cold, you get to a fire and there's warmth, and the fire can cook a good steak and make it so tasty. So in the fireplace, in the cooking pit, it's a wonderful thing. But if you took out a hot burning log and put it on your couch, what's going to happen? You're going to have havoc. You're going to have destruction. And the illustration that this person was making is that in its place, in its proper place, and doing what it was designed to do, to give warmth, to cook food, fire is a wonderful thing, but out of its context, it creates havoc and destruction. And his illustration was that sex is the very same way. So, all right, let's look. Now we're going to move into the wedding. And in verse 6, we see her talking about what we're going to see as a procession. We don't really know this till you get a little further and see that there's a wedding. When you know there's a wedding, you know this is a wedding procession. Listen to her speak, verse 6 of chapter 3. What is this coming up from the wilderness like columns of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all scented powders of the merchant? Behold, it's the traveling couch of Solomon, 60 mighty men around it, of the mighty men of Israel. All of them are wielders of the sword, expert in war. And you continue to read, there's men who came in her presence, and it seems like they came to pick her up and to take her back to the palace where King Solomon is. And then we read a little bit ago, verse 11, and gaze on King Solomon with the crown with which his mother has crowned him on the day of his wedding, on the day of his gladness of heart. So we see in chapter 3, there's a wedding taking place. We've seen the courtship, and now there's a wedding. And now in chapter 4, there's a wedding night. And they begin to talk and compliment each other. They begin to compliment parts of the body that makes it obvious that they're naked. They are sweet and tender. There's a lot of praises. Now, again, we're going to get to this idea of sex, and I would say sex and pleasure is an invention of God. These things were designed by God. And in our world, sometimes there's two extremes, and one is the extreme of what we call hedonism. And that's people, they want pleasure and they move headlong into it, and they're careless about it. There are no boundaries, and they're seeking a pleasure. And when people there are some groups that see that and go, well, then pleasure is all bad. So the other extreme is what we call asceticism. And that basically says, I'm going to deny myself of all pleasure. Pleasure is evil. Well, pleasure is the invention of God in the proper context. All right. Now in this, I want to mention one thing. And again, we're talking about the marriage relationship. What a relationship should be like between a man and woman. Verse 12 of chapter 4, he's talking about her, and he says, you are a garden locked is my sister, my bride, a rock garden locked, a spring sealed up. What is he talking about? He's saying she's a virgin. We see here again God's design, God's guidelines, God's expectation for a sexual relationship between a man and a woman. She came to the marriage as a virgin. I read this quote, there should be abstinence before marriage, fidelity within marriage, but then enjoyment of the marriage. All right. So we have the courtship, we have the wedding, we have the honeymoon night, and then chapter 5, we have the marriage. And we see right off that there's a conflict. And so I'm going to try to quickly go through this conflict here. In verse 2, she's going to say she's having a dream. She says, I was asleep, but my heart was awake. And then she begins explaining this dream. And she says in this, it seems like she's saying, my husband came home late. I was already in bed. But there was some tension there, because I think what they're saying is he came in and he was in the mood. But she was saying, I've already taken off my dress. Should I put it on again? I've already washed my feet. How can I dirty them again? It's kind of like she's saying, I have a headache. This is not a good night. There's something not right. There's been some conflict, and she's not open to a sexual relationship at that moment because of the conflict. And then she begins to talk about how then all of a sudden she's like, there's something wrong, but she wants to be right. Do you understand that feeling of being in an argument but wanting things to be right? And so she begins to talk about, again, this dream, and she's running and chasing and looking for him. She wants things to be right. And then we go to chapter 6, and you see them coming back together. There are things that are made right. You know, conflict is so normal in our marriage. And this book about marriage here brings up conflict. And then a commitment to be, then a commitment of their love to one another. You know, there's going to be conflict in marriages, and there's probably lots of reasons, but two main ones there's going to be conflict. One, you're a human being. We're not always at our best. We have bad days. We sometimes do things that's not our normal self, but we do things, and there's going to be conflict. We sometimes make bad decisions. Number two, between men and women, we are different. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. We see things different. One guy says, women see with pink glasses, men see with blue glasses. They often see things from a different perspective, so there's going to be conflict. And then the book begins, and they keep talking, and there's a section in chapter 8 that basically says, that love is powerful and it is intense. And he just says love is a great gift. It can be dangerous, but it's a great gift to a man and a woman. Well, we're running long. Let's wrap up. So why was this book written? It's a love story. As I said, there's some steamy descriptions, some explicit illustrations between a husband and a wife in this. Why was this written? Do you remember when we went back and looked at what the description of Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 4 says? God gave Solomon wisdom, very great discernment, and a breadth of mind. It's like it talks about all the things that Solomon had understanding. Did he have great understanding of what a marriage relationship should look like? You see, this book was written, and it gives us the joy, the guidelines, the barriers of what it means to have marital intimacy, sexual intimacy between a man and a woman who are in love with one another. So, I would encourage you to read this book, and when you read it and delve into it and explain and begin to try to understand what it's saying, you can see what it means to have that intimacy between a man and a woman. So here are some things that we can pull from the Song of Solomon. Give your spouse the attention he or she needs. Take the time to truly know your spouse. Encouragement and praise, not criticism, are vital to a successful relationship. Enjoy each other. Plan some getaways. Be playful. Delight in God's gift of married love. 4. Do whatever is necessary to reassure your commitments to your spouse. 5. Work through problems. never ever consider divorce as a solution.
The ground began to shake, the stone was rolled away. His perfect love could not be overcome. Now death, where is your sting? Our resurrected King has rendered you defeated. Forever He is glorified. Forever He is lifted high. Forever He is risen. He is alive. He is alive. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. The Lamb is overcome. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. The Lamb is overcome. Forever He is glorified. Forever He is lifted high. Forever He is risen. He